It was just a cardboard box, nothing special, just a regular medium-sized cardboard box that probably contained books or kitchen items, but that box changed my life forever. "Let me help you with that," I said to Emily, our new neighbor who had moved in 2 doors down last week. She was struggling with several bags in this particularly awkward box as she tried to unlock her door. "Oh, thank you so much," Emily smiled, relief washing over her face. She couldn't have been more than 24, with that youthful energy that made everything seem like both a crisis and an adventure. I seriously overestimated my carrying capacity. I laughed and took the box, which was surprisingly heavy. "No problem at all. We've all been there. Moving is the worst." Emily unlocked her door and I followed her inside, placing the box where she indicated in the living room. The apartment was a mirror image of ours, except hers was filled with that chaotic energy of half-unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture that characterizes every new beginning. "I really appreciate it, John," she said. "I've met so many neighbors already, but can't remember everyone's names." "That's what neighbors are for," I replied, heading toward the door. "If you need anything else, my wife Sarah and I are in 3B. Don't hesitate to knock." The entire interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes. That's it. 3 minutes of basic human decency that somehow transformed into the catalyst for destroying my 13-year marriage. I didn't know it yet, but Sarah had been watching from our window the whole time. When I returned to our apartment, I found her standing in the kitchen, arms crossed tightly across her chest, her face a mask of cold fury I hadn't seen before. "Have fun?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I opened the refrigerator, grabbing a bottle of water, completely unaware of the storm brewing. "What do you mean?" "I saw you with her," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly. "Our new neighbor, young, pretty, needed a big, strong man to help her?" I nearly choked on my water. "Are you serious right now? I helped her carry a box inside, that's it." "Oh, I'm sure that's all it was," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing. "I saw how she looked at you, and how you looked at her." "Sarah, I literally just helped her with a box. It took 3 minutes. I was being neighborly." "Neighborly," she repeated, as if the word itself was evidence of something sinister. "Is that what they call it now?" I stared at her, genuinely confused. Nothing in our 13 years together had prepared me for this level of irrational jealousy. Sure, we'd had our rough patches, especially in the last year as we both approached milestone birthdays, me at 39 approaching 40, her at 37. But this was something entirely new. "You know what?" Sarah said, her voice now eerily calm. "You're sleeping on the couch until you apologize." I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "Apologize? For helping a neighbor carry a box? For flirting with her right under my nose?" Sarah's voice rose to a shout. "For embarrassing me? For making me look like a fool?" "I wasn't flirting with anyone," I shouted back, my confusion giving way to anger. "This is insane, Sarah. You're seeing things that aren't there." "Until you admit what you did and apologize," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, determined tone I'd never heard before, "you're not welcome in our bedroom." With that, she turned and walked away, slamming our bedroom door with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. I stood there in our kitchen, water bottle in hand, completely stunned. What had just happened? How had an act of simple kindness been twisted into something sordid? And more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do now? That night I did sleep on the couch. Not because I accepted her ridiculous ultimatum, but because I was too angry to deal with the confrontation. Our couch, a stylish but thoroughly uncomfortable sectional we'd bought during more prosperous times, seemed to have a special talent for finding pressure points in my back I didn't even know existed. By morning, my anger had crystallized into something harder and more resolute. I wasn't going to apologize for something I didn't do. I wasn't going to validate this bizarre jealousy by giving in to it. And I certainly wasn't going to spend another night on that medieval torture device disguised as a couch. After a silent breakfast where Sarah pointedly ignored me while scrolling through her phone, I made my decision. If she thought banishing me to the couch would break me, she had severely miscalculated. Our apartment had a small storage room off the kitchen that we'd been using for holiday decorations, tools, and the various accumulations of life. It was about 8 feet by 10 feet, small but not impossibly so, and it had a window. I spent that Saturday cleaning it out, hauling boxes to our actual storage unit in the basement of the building. I swept, I scrubbed, I painted. I made 3 trips to IKEA and 1 to Best Buy. By Sunday evening, I had transformed the storage room into a respectable bedroom. A twin bed with a memory foam mattress, a small desk for my laptop, a comfortable chair, a floor lamp, and even a small bookshelf. When Sarah returned from her sister's place Sunday night, she found me hanging a curtain rod over the window of my new room. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Solving a problem," I replied without looking at her. "You banished me from our bedroom, but you didn't specify I had to sleep on the couch. You're turning our storage room into... what exactly?" "My bedroom," I said simply, testing the sturdiness of the rod. "For as long as this ridiculous situation continues." "You can't be serious," she scoffed. "Just apologize and stop this nonsense." I turned to face her fully. "I have nothing to apologize for, Sarah. I didn't flirt with Emily. I helped her with a box. That's it. And I'm not going to lie and say I did something wrong when I didn't." Her face flushed with anger. "So this is your solution? Moving out of our bedroom?" "You moved me out of our bedroom," I corrected her. "I'm just making sure I have somewhere comfortable to sleep until you come to your senses." "Fine," she snapped. "Do whatever you want. But don't expect me to make this easy for you." I had no idea what she meant by that, but I would soon find out. The next morning, I woke up surprisingly well rested. The twin bed was actually quite comfortable, and the room, though small, felt cozy rather than cramped. I had hung some of my favorite photos on the wall, mostly landscapes from our travels before things got complicated. And the morning light filtering through the curtains gave the space a peaceful glow. My contentment was short-lived. When I entered the kitchen, Sarah was just finishing her coffee. "I'm not cooking for you anymore," she announced without preamble. "And I'm not doing your laundry either. If you want to live separately, you can take care of yourself separately." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot she had made, apparently that hadn't been included in her strike, and leaned against the counter. "That's fine," I said calmly. "I can take care of myself." Her eyes narrowed slightly, clearly not expecting this reaction. She had probably anticipated pleading or anger, not calm acceptance. "We'll see how long that lasts," she muttered as she grabbed her purse and left for work. That evening, I ordered a small refrigerator, a microwave, and a hot plate for my room. I also did 3 loads of laundry, including Sarah's things, because despite everything, I wasn't going to stoop to her level of pettiness. The next day, I stopped at the grocery store on my way home from work and bought my own food. I set up my mini kitchen in my room and made myself a simple but decent dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables. The sounds and smells of cooking must have surprised Sarah, who appeared in my doorway just as I was sitting down to eat. "What is all this?" she asked, gesturing to my new appliances. "Just adapting," I replied, cutting into my chicken. "Want some? I made plenty." "No," she said, her voice oddly strangled. "I don't want any of your food." "Suit yourself," I shrugged, continuing to eat. She lingered in the doorway for a moment longer, then turned away without another word. I heard her order delivery 20 minutes later. Over the next week, my little room evolved even further. I added a small TV mounted on the wall, a better desk chair, and a set of noise-canceling headphones that proved invaluable as Sarah began her next phase of attack. Noise warfare. It started with her watching TV at maximum volume late into the night. Then came the phone calls to her friends, conducted on speaker in the living room, where she would loudly detail what a terrible husband I was. Finally, there were the impromptu wine nights with her friends from work, cackling and gossiping until well past midnight. None of it worked. My headphones blocked the noise, and my room had become a sanctuary of sorts. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to punish me, Sarah had inadvertently given me something I hadn't realized I needed. Space. Space to think, to read, to work on the certification courses I'd been putting off for years. In the quiet of my room, with Sarah's chaos muffled by technology, I found myself more productive and centered than I had been in years. This only seemed to infuriate her more. "You think you're so clever with your little bachelor pad," she spat one morning, 3 weeks into our standoff. "Everyone thinks it's pathetic that you won't just apologize." "Who is everyone?" I asked mildly, not looking up from my coffee and newspaper. "My friends, my sister, everyone I've told about this situation." "And have you told them the truth about what happened?" I asked. "Or your version where I was somehow seducing our new neighbor by carrying a box?" Her silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said, folding my newspaper and placing it on the counter. Look, Sarah, this has gone on long enough. I didn't flirt with Emily. I was being a decent human being. Your jealousy and this punishment are completely out of proportion. If you just apologize. For what? I interrupted, finally allowing my frustration to show. For something I didn't do? No, that's not how this works. That's not how our marriage should work. We're supposed to trust each other, not create tests and traps. Trust has to be earned, she shot back. And what have I done in 13 years to make you think you can't trust me? I asked, genuinely curious. Have I ever given you any reason to doubt me before this? Instead of answering, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. The conversation was clearly over, but the war was just beginning to escalate. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. Hey, John, it's Emily from 3D. Just wanted to check if everything's okay. I ran into Sarah in the hallway and she seemed really upset. She said some weird things about us that confused me. I stared at the message, my stomach knotting. So Sarah had confronted Emily directly. This was getting out of hand. Hi, Emily, I replied after careful consideration. I'm sorry about that. Sarah and I are going through some marital issues right now, and she's got it in her head that there was something inappropriate about me helping you that day. Obviously, there wasn't. I'd appreciate it if you could just keep your distance from both of us until this blows over. Nothing personal. Of course, came the swift reply. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. For what it's worth, I told Sarah nothing happened and that you mentioned her right away when we met. Hope things get better. I thanked her and deleted the conversation, not wanting Sarah to find it and twist it into more evidence. But the exchange left me deeply unsettled. How many other neighbors had Sarah confronted with her delusions? How far was she willing to take this? The next day, I came home from work to find 2 police officers at my door. My heart rate immediately spiked. Had something happened to Sarah? Was there a break-in? Are you John Mitchell? One of the officers asked. Yes, I replied, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Is everything okay? Did something happen to my wife? No, sir. Your wife is fine. She called us regarding a dispute about room occupancy in your apartment. I stared at them, momentarily unable to process what I was hearing. I'm sorry, what? Your wife has alleged that you've unlawfully taken over the guest room of your shared apartment against her wishes, the second officer explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. It took every ounce of self-control not to laugh in their faces. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, Officers, I appreciate you responding, but this is a private matter between my wife and me. We're having some marital difficulties. I've been sleeping in what was our storage room, not a guest room, and there's nothing unlawful about a husband using a room in his own home. The officers exchanged glances. Do you both own this apartment, sir? Yes, we're both on the lease and the mortgage. The first officer nodded. Then you have every right to use any room in the apartment. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Sarah appeared in the hallway behind them, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He's taken over the room without my permission, she insisted. He's moved all his things in there. Ma'am, the second officer said gently, as your husband just explained, if both your names are on the lease, he has as much right to use any room as you do. We can't force him to sleep where you want him to sleep. This is ridiculous, Sarah muttered. So he can just do whatever he wants? Within the confines of the law, you both have equal rights to the apartment, the first officer explained. If you can't resolve this dispute between yourselves, you might want to consider mediation or legal counsel. After the officers left, Sarah and I stood in tense silence in our living room. I can't believe you called the police, I finally said, my voice quiet but intense. Do you have any idea how serious that is? How embarrassing? I can't believe you've turned our home into a battleground, she countered, all because you won't admit you were wrong. Sarah, this has gone beyond the original issue, I said, suddenly feeling very tired. This isn't healthy. This isn't how married people should treat each other. Then sleep in our bed and act like my husband. Under your conditions, after you tried to have me removed from my own home by the police? No, that's not happening. I walked past her to my room and closed the door firmly behind me. As I sat on my bed, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just about an imagined flirtation anymore. This was about control, about winning at all costs. And for the first time, I began to seriously consider whether our marriage could or should be saved. The police incident marked a turning point, but not the one Sarah had hoped for. Far from intimidating me into submission, it made me realize I needed to protect myself. The next day, I installed a lock on my door and set up small security cameras in my room and the common areas of the apartment. I wasn't paranoid, I was being prudent. My foresight proved justified only 3 days later when I returned from work to find scratch marks around the lock on my door and a bent butter knife on the kitchen counter. Sarah had tried to break in while I was gone. That night, I sent an email to a divorce attorney a colleague had recommended, requesting a consultation. This had gone beyond a spat or a rough patch. This was becoming dangerous. When I confronted Sarah about the attempted break-in, she didn't deny it. "It's my home too," she said defiantly. "I have a right to go into any room I want." "Not when it contains my personal belongings," I replied. "Not when you've made it clear you're willing to escalate the situation beyond all reason." "What were you looking for anyway?" "Evidence," she said, her chin lifted in defiance. "Evidence of what?" "Of you and her. I know something's going on." I stared at her, truly seeing for the first time how far gone she was. "Sarah, I've barely seen Emily since that day. We say hello when we pass in the hallway. That's it. There is no me and her." "I don't believe you," she said, her voice cold. "You changed after you met her. You're different." "You're right, I am different," I admitted. "But it's not because of Emily. It's because of how you've been treating me. It's because you'd rather destroy our marriage than admit you might have overreacted." "So this is my fault?" she demanded, her voice rising. "The way you've handled it?" "Yes. The police, the breaking and entering, the constant harassment, that's all on you." She stormed off to our bedroom, her bedroom now, and slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall and shattered. I swept up the glass, oddly calm. The picture had been from our honeymoon in Hawaii. Its destruction felt symbolic somehow. The next morning, I found a text message from Sarah's sister, Jennifer. "John, what the hell is going on? Sarah called me hysterical last night. She says you've completely lost it and are threatening to divorce her over some neighbor." I sighed deeply. Of course, Sarah had twisted the story completely. "Jennifer, I appreciate your concern," I wrote back, "but Sarah isn't giving you the full picture. She accused me of flirting with a neighbor when I helped her carry a box. Demanded I apologize and sleep on the couch until I did. When I refused to apologize for something I didn't do, she escalated to calling the police, trying to break into my room and more. This isn't about the neighbor. This is about Sarah's behavior, which has become increasingly concerning." Jennifer's reply came an hour later. "I don't know what to believe anymore. She's been acting strange for months, even before this incident. Maybe this is about more than just a neighbor." That gave me pause. Had there been signs I'd missed? Had Sarah been struggling with something deeper that I'd failed to notice? "What do you mean she's been acting strange?" I asked. "Paranoid, jealous of your female coworkers, constantly checking your phone when you leave it around, making snide comments about younger women. I thought it was just her approaching her late 30s, but maybe it's something more." I sat back, stunned. I had noticed some of those behaviors, but had attributed them to normal midlife insecurities. We were both approaching milestone birthdays. Maybe I'd been too dismissive of her feelings. Still, nothing justified the extremes she'd gone to these past weeks. "I appreciate the insight," I replied to Jennifer. "But regardless of what's going on with her, this situation has spiraled out of control." "I know," Jennifer wrote. "I'll try to talk to her. Just be careful, John. I've never seen her like this before." The next week brought a new escalation, the party offensive. Sarah began inviting friends over almost every night, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneous gatherings that just happened to materialize whenever I was trying to work or rest. Music blared, laughter echoed, and occasionally a drunk friend would pound on my door, demanding I come out and stop being such a killjoy. I weathered this storm with my noise-canceling headphones and a newfound determination to improve myself during this bizarre limbo. I enrolled in online courses related to my field, started working out in our building's small gym, and even began meditating, something I'd always dismissed as New Age nonsense, but now found genuinely helpful. My calm resilience only seemed to fuel Sarah's desperation. One night, after her friends had left and the apartment had fallen into its nightly silence, there was a soft knock on my door. Not the aggressive pounding I'd become accustomed to, but something gentler. John? Sarah's voice, uncharacteristically small. Can we talk? I hesitated, my hand on the lock. Was this a genuine olive branch or another trap? What do you want to talk about? I asked through the door. Please, she said, her voice cracking slightly. Just open the door. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and opened it to find Sarah standing there in her nightgown, eyes red-rimmed from crying or drinking or both. Can I come in? She asked, looking past me into my small domain. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, standing firmly in the doorway. We can talk here. Her eyes flashed with momentary anger before settling back into pleading. I miss you, she said simply. You miss me, I repeated, not phrased as a question but as a statement of disbelief. You've spent the past month trying to break me, humiliate me, and drive me out of my own home, and now you miss me. I was angry, she said, swaying slightly. I could smell the wine on her breath now. I overreacted. Overreacted is yelling for 10 minutes then calming down, Sarah. What you did, what you're still doing, goes well beyond overreaction. So you won't forgive me? Her voice took on a dangerous edge. After everything we've been through? I didn't say that, I replied carefully, but forgiveness requires genuine remorse and an understanding of what went wrong. I don't see either of those things right now. What do you want from me? She demanded, tears welling in her eyes. Do you want me to beg? To get down on my knees right here? And to my horror, she actually began to sink to her knees in the hallway, a grotesque parody of contrition that made my stomach turn. Stop, I said firmly, taking her arm to keep her upright. This isn't helping anything. You're drunk, Sarah. Go to bed. We can talk tomorrow when you're sober. Her demeanor changed instantly, tears vanishing as she yanked her arm from my grasp. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? Setting up your perfect little life in here while I suffer out there? I think we're both suffering, I said quietly. But only one of us is trying to inflict that suffering on the other. You started this, she hissed. You and that little slut down the hall. And we're back to this, I sighed, stepping back into my room. Good night, Sarah. I closed the door in her face, something I never would have imagined doing a month ago. Through the door, I heard her curse, a half-sob, half-growl of frustration, before she stomped away to her bedroom. The next morning, I found my room door smeared with what appeared to be red lipstick, the word liar scrawled in dramatic capital letters. I cleaned it without comment, but took photos first, adding them to the growing file of evidence I was collecting of Sarah's erratic behavior. That afternoon, I met with the divorce attorney, bringing my documented timeline of events and evidence of Sarah's escalating actions. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Rebecca, reviewed it all with a practiced eye. You've been thorough, she noted, impressed. Most clients don't think to document things this carefully until it's too late. I work in risk management, I explained. Documenting potential issues is second nature. Well, it's going to serve you well here, Rebecca said. Based on what you've shown me, we have a strong case for a fault-based divorce on grounds of emotional cruelty. However, she cautioned, these cases can get messy, and they often drag out longer than no-fault divorces. Are you prepared for that? At this point, I said firmly, I just want out, whatever it takes. Then let's get started, she replied, sliding a retainer agreement across the desk. One evening, about 6 weeks into our Cold War, there was a knock on my door. Not Sarah's aggressive pounding, but a gentle, almost hesitant tap. When I opened it, I found not Sarah but her friend Lisa, a woman I'd always thought of as one of the more reasonable members of my wife's social circle. Can we talk? She asked quietly. I stepped aside to let her in, curious about this unexpected development. Sarah doesn't know I'm here, Lisa admitted, perching awkwardly on my desk chair while I sat on the bed. She'd probably never speak to me again if she found out. So why risk it? I asked. Lisa sighed deeply. Because this has gone too far, John. Way too far. She's not well. This obsession with you and the neighbor, the way she's handling it, it's not normal. Tell me something I don't know, I said, but without malice. Has she always been like this? Am I just seeing it clearly for the first time? Lisa shook her head. No, this is new. Or at least, this extreme version is new. She's always been a bit controlling, a bit dramatic. But this is different. It's like she's created this whole narrative in her head and can't see anything that contradicts it. Has she said what started all this? Because from my perspective, I helped a neighbor with a box, and my marriage imploded. It's more than that, Lisa said carefully. It's been building for a while. Her turning 37 hit her harder than she lets on. And then you and Emily. There is no me and Emily, I interrupted firmly. I know that, Lisa assured me, but Sarah convinced herself that Emily represents everything she's afraid of. Youth, new beginnings, someone without the baggage of years together. It's not rational, but fears rarely are. We talked for nearly an hour. Lisa didn't try to convince me to apologize or give in, which I appreciated. She simply wanted to give me context, to help me understand what might be happening in Sarah's mind. It was the most honest conversation anyone had had with me since this nightmare began. Before she left, Lisa paused at the door. For what it's worth, John, I think you've handled this with a lot more grace than most people would have. But I also think this marriage might be beyond saving. I nodded slowly. I'm starting to think you're right. The next day, Sarah brought in the big guns, a professional mediator, not a marriage counselor or therapist who might actually address the underlying issues, but a mediator whose job was to help us reach an agreement. The mediator, a friend of Sarah's sister, arrived on a Saturday morning when I was usually in my room working on my certification. John, Sarah called through my locked door, Marianne is here to help us resolve this situation. I opened the door to find Sarah standing with a professionally dressed woman who looked deeply uncomfortable. I didn't agree to mediation, I said calmly. Well, you've refused to be reasonable for weeks now, Sarah countered. Something has to give. I looked at Marianne, who had the grace to appear embarrassed. Are you a licensed mediator? I asked her. I am, she confirmed, though I should mention that I usually don't work with people I have a personal connection to. But given the circumstances, given that Sarah didn't tell you the full story, I suggested. Marianne's slight flinch told me I'd hit the mark. Look, I said with a sigh, I'm happy to talk, but there's nothing to mediate here. I didn't do what Sarah accused me of doing. I won't apologize for something I didn't do. And frankly, after 6 weeks of harassment, property damage, and even involving the police, we're well beyond a simple apology fixing anything. You're just being stubborn, Sarah exploded. All of this could end if you just admit what you did. I turned to Marianne. You see the problem? She wants me to admit to something that never happened. How do you mediate that? Marianne looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps we could start by each of you describing what you believe happened without interruption from the other person? Fine, I agreed. But can we do this in the living room like adults rather than crowded in my doorway? We moved to the living room, and I went first, describing the simple act of helping Emily with a box and Sarah's subsequent accusations and ultimatum. I detailed the escalating tactics she'd employed over the weeks that followed, keeping my tone as neutral as possible despite the subject matter. When it was Sarah's turn, she painted a very different picture. One where I had been openly flirtatious, where Emily and I had shared meaningful glances, and where I had lingered in her apartment for suspicious amounts of time. In her version, my refusal to apologize was proof of my guilt, and my elaborate room setup was a calculated move to hurt her. When she finished, Marianne was silent for a long moment. Have either of you spoken to Emily about this? She finally asked. Absolutely not, Sarah said quickly. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I haven't either, I said, deciding not to mention Emily's text message. It seemed inappropriate to drag her into our marital problems. Marianne nodded thoughtfully. Sarah, based on what you've both shared, I have to ask, what would an acceptable resolution look like to you? What specifically do you want John to do? He needs to admit he was flirting with her, apologize sincerely, get rid of this ridiculous room, and commit to being a faithful husband, Sarah said promptly, as if she'd rehearsed the answer. And if he apologizes but maintains he wasn't flirting, would that be acceptable? Sarah's eyes narrowed. No, I know what I saw. He needs to admit the truth. And John, Marianne turned to me, what would an acceptable resolution look like to you? I considered my answer carefully. At this point, I think we need professional help. Real marriage counseling, not mediation. Sarah's reaction to this incident and everything that's followed suggests there are much deeper issues at play. If she's willing to work on those with a therapist, I'd be open to trying to rebuild. If not, I let the sentence hang unfinished. So you're making demands now? Sarah snapped. No, I said quietly. I'm being honest about where we are. This isn't about the box or Emily anymore. It's about trust, respect, and how we handle conflict. We've lost all three. So this is my fault? Sarah's voice rose higher. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, I replied. What matters is whether we can fix it. By me giving in to your demands. I shook my head, suddenly bone-tired. That's not what I said, Sarah. But I'm not going to sacrifice truth and self-respect to play along with games. That's not love. It's manipulation. Sarah burst into tears then. Not the controlled, manipulative tears I'd seen her use before, but raw, ugly sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Without another word, she ran to the bedroom and slammed the door. Marianne and I sat in awkward silence for a moment. I'm sorry, she finally said. I don't think I can help you two right now. This situation is beyond my scope as a mediator. I know, I said simply. Thank you for trying. After she left, I returned to my room, sat on my bed, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was happening. Our marriage was failing, not because of a box or a pretty neighbor, but because something fundamental had broken between us, something that had perhaps been cracking for years without either of us noticing or admitting it. For the first time since this began, I wept. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer and officially filed the preliminary paperwork for a legal separation, the first step toward divorce in our state. I didn't tell Sarah immediately. I needed time to prepare for the nuclear reaction I knew would follow. In a strange twist of fate, it was during this limbo period that Sarah made her most desperate move yet. She invited Emily and her boyfriend over for dinner. I came home from work to find Sarah cooking for the first time in weeks. The apartment smelled of roasting chicken and herbs, and she was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years. We're having guests for dinner, she announced when I emerged from my room, drawn by the unfamiliar domestic activity. I expect you to join us. Who's coming? I asked, immediately suspicious. Emily and her boyfriend David, Sarah replied, her voice artificially light. I thought it was time we properly welcomed them to the building. I stared at her, trying to decipher her game. This wasn't a peace offering. It was too calculated for that. This was a setup of some kind. Why would you invite them? I asked bluntly. You've spent the last 2 months accusing me of having an affair with her. Maybe I realized I was being silly, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Maybe I want to get to know her better. I didn't believe her for a second, but I also didn't see how I could refuse without looking guilty of exactly what she'd been accusing me of. Fine, I said. I'll join you for dinner. I retreated to my room to shower and change, my mind racing. What was Sarah planning? To catch us in some imagined signal? To create a scene? To humiliate me in front of strangers? None of the possibilities seemed good. Emily and David arrived at 7 p.m. sharp. Emily looked surprised to see me open the door. John, I didn't realize. Sarah just said she was having a neighbor dinner, she said, clearly confused. David, a tall man with friendly eyes, extended his hand in greeting. It's nice to finally meet you properly, I said, shaking his hand. Please come in. Sarah's just finishing up in the kitchen. The first few minutes were awkward but civil. We made small talk about the building, the neighborhood, their move from Boston. Sarah emerged from the kitchen with forced cheerfulness, offering drinks and appetizers with the brittle energy of someone operating on pure adrenaline. It wasn't until we sat down to dinner that her plan became clear. So, Emily, Sarah began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, John was quite taken with you when you first moved in. He couldn't stop talking about how he helped you that day. Emily glanced at me, confusion clouding her features. Oh, with the box. That was really nice of him. Yes, so nice, Sarah continued, her smile tightening. He's always so helpful to attractive young women. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The chicken is delicious, he said, clearly trying to change the subject. Thank you, David, Sarah replied before immediately turning back to Emily. You must have made quite an impression on John. He completely changed after meeting you. I'm not sure what you mean, Emily said, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Sarah, I warned quietly. What? She asked with exaggerated innocence. I'm just making conversation with our new neighbors. Isn't that what you wanted? For us all to be friendly? Not like this, I said firmly. Like what? Sarah's voice rose slightly. Am I saying something wrong? I'm just pointing out how helpful my husband was to you, Emily, how he rushed to your rescue. He was being neighborly, Emily said carefully. It was a simple kindness that I appreciated. Simple kindness, Sarah repeated with a harsh laugh. Is that what they call it these days? David put down his fork. I think we should go, he said quietly to Emily. No, please stay, Sarah insisted, her composure beginning to crack. We haven't even gotten to the good part yet. I wanted to ask Emily about that day, about what really happened between you two. Sarah, stop, I said, my voice hard now. Nothing happened. You're embarrassing yourself and making our guests uncomfortable. I need to know, Sarah suddenly shouted, slamming her hand on the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. I need to know why my husband decided I wasn't good enough anymore after meeting you. Emily stood up, her face pale. We're leaving. Sarah, I don't know what you think happened, but John literally just helped me with a box. That's it. He mentioned you right away, said you both lived in 3B, and invited me to ask either of you for help if I needed it. There was absolutely nothing inappropriate about our interaction. You're lying, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You're both lying. David stood as well, putting a protective arm around Emily. I think you have some things to work out between yourselves. Thank you for dinner, but we really should go. As they headed for the door, Emily paused and looked back at me with genuine concern. I'm sorry, she said softly. After they left, the apartment fell into a terrible silence. Sarah sat at the table, staring at nothing, her breathing uneven. What were you trying to accomplish? I finally asked. What did you think would happen? I thought she would admit it, Sarah whispered. I thought I would finally have proof. There is no proof to find, Sarah. It didn't happen. She looked up at me then, her eyes wild. Then why won't you just say you're sorry? Why has this gone on for months when you could have just apologized? Because it would be a lie, I said simply, and because your reaction to all this has shown me something about us, about you, that I can't unsee. I returned to my room, locked the door, and spent the night researching apartments. It was time to move out, to end this toxic stalemate before it destroyed us both completely. The next day I came home to find the apartment in chaos. Sarah had gone on a rampage, attempting to remove furniture, electronics, and kitchenware, anything she could carry. Many of these items were things I had purchased before our marriage, or with my own money during it. I stopped her as she was struggling to drag our television toward the door. What are you doing? I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Taking what's mine before you try to steal it all, she gasped, out of breath from the exertion. The TV isn't yours. I bought it for my birthday last year, I pointed out, with our joint money. No, with my bonus from work, which I specifically kept separate for that purchase. She abandoned the TV and grabbed a stack of plates from the counter. These are mine. My mother gave them to us. Sarah, stop, I said, not moving to physically stop her, but standing firmly in her path. This isn't how this works. You can't just decide what belongs to whom and start removing things. Watch me, she challenged, attempting to push past me. Just then, her brother Mark arrived at the door, which Sarah had left open in her frenzy. Mark had always been reasonable, even friendly toward me, and looked deeply disturbed by the scene before him. Sarah, what's going on? You called and said it was an emergency, he said, taking in the disarray of the apartment. I need help moving my things. Out before he steals everything, Sarah said, her voice shrill. He's trying to rob me blind, Mark. Mark looked to me for explanation. She's decided to start dividing our property without any discussion or agreement, I said calmly. Many of the things she's trying to take are items I purchased before our marriage or with my own separate funds. He's lying, Sarah shouted. Everything here is half mine. Sarah, that's not how property division works in a marriage, Mark said gently. There are legal processes for this. So you're on his side, she demanded, her face flushing with anger. My own brother? I'm not on anyone's side, Mark insisted. I'm just saying you can't just take things without agreement, especially if John can prove he purchased them separately. I took a deep breath. It was time. Sarah, Mark, I filed for legal separation last week. The papers should have been delivered today. This is why we need to do this properly, through the courts. Sarah went very still, her face draining of color. You what? We're getting divorced, Sarah. This is over. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if the words wouldn't compute. Then with a guttural cry, she hurled the stack of plates at the wall, where they shattered in an explosion of ceramic shards. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, her voice raw. "You can't just throw away 13 years. "I didn't," I said quietly. "We did. Together." Sarah collapsed to her knees among the broken dishes, her body racked with sobs. "You've ruined everything," she wept. "Everything." Mark moved to her side, kneeling beside her and carefully avoiding the sharp fragments surrounding them. "Sarah, come on. You're going to hurt yourself. Let me take you to my place for a while." She allowed him to help her up, her body limp with defeat. As Mark guided her toward the door, she looked back at me one last time. "I hope she was worth it," she said, her voice hollow. "There was never anyone else, Sarah," I replied softly. "That's what makes this all so tragic." After they left, I surveyed the wreckage of our home, broken dishes, half-packed boxes, furniture askew, and felt a profound sadness settle over me. This wasn't how our story was supposed to end. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward, but emotionally draining. Sarah contested it initially, hiring an aggressive lawyer who made outlandish claims about my behavior and character. But without evidence, and with the testimony of both Emily and several other neighbors about Sarah's increasingly erratic behavior, the court saw through the allegations. In the end, I was granted the apartment, primarily because I had made the down payment with an inheritance from my grandfather, and Sarah received a financial settlement that my lawyer considered more than fair. During the proceedings, I learned from Mark that Sarah had moved in with her sister and was barely functioning. She had taken a leave of absence from work and spent most days in bed, refusing to discuss what had happened or make plans for her future. Despite everything, that knowledge hurt. I hadn't wanted to destroy her. I had just wanted honesty and respect. Somehow, those simple requirements had proven impossible. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a call from Jennifer, Sarah's sister. "John, I know we haven't spoken since the divorce," she began hesitantly, "but I thought you should know. Sarah's not doing well." "What do you mean?" I asked, a familiar knot of concern forming in my stomach despite everything. "She's been diagnosed with depression and possibly some kind of delusional disorder. The doctors say it might have been building for years, but the incident with you and the neighbor was the trigger that sent her over the edge." I sat down heavily on my couch, the weight of this information pressing on my chest. I had no idea it was that serious. "None of us did," Jennifer sighed. "She hid it well until she couldn't anymore. The therapist thinks her accusations about you and Emily were a manifestation of deeper issues: fear of aging, abandonment anxiety, unresolved trauma from her childhood. The box incident just happened to be the thing her mind latched onto." "I wish I had known," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure what I would have done differently. "You couldn't have known," Jennifer assured me. "She didn't know herself. But I thought you should know she wasn't just being malicious or manipulative. She was sick." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, processing this new context for everything that had happened. It didn't excuse Sarah's behavior, but it helped me understand it in a way I hadn't before. The realization was both a relief and a new kind of sadness, grief for the woman I had loved, who had been fighting battles I couldn't see. A week later, I received a letter from Sarah's rehabilitation center. Her handwriting, once so familiar, now seemed like the script of a stranger. "John," she wrote, "I'm writing this as part of my therapy. I'm supposed to make amends to those I've hurt. I don't know if that's possible with you, but I have to try. I'm sorry for what I put you through. I was in a dark place and couldn't see clearly. The doctors tell me I was experiencing paranoid delusions, but that doesn't make what I did to you any less real or painful. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm getting help now. I hope someday I can make sense of everything that happened. Until then, I'm trying to get better. Sarah." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond, wasn't sure I ever would be, but I was glad she was getting help, finding her way back to herself after being lost in the labyrinth of her own mind. 6 months after the divorce, I happened to run into Mark at a coffee shop downtown. He seemed surprised but not unhappy to see me. "How are you holding up?" he asked as we waited for our orders. "I'm doing okay," I said, and was surprised to find it was true. "How's Sarah?" Mark's expression turned somber. "She's still struggling. The medication helps with the delusions, but the depression is persistent. She lost her job, had to sell her car. She's living in a tiny apartment on the south side now, barely making ends meet. My stomach twisted with a complex mixture of emotions, guilt, sadness, relief that it wasn't me anymore. I'm sorry to hear that. It's not your fault, Mark said firmly. You did what you had to do. Sarah's illness, it would have manifested eventually, with or without the trigger of you and the neighbor. We parted with an awkward handshake, the ghost of our almost brotherhood lingering between us. Nearly a year after our separation, I was leaving my apartment building when I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench across the street. Sarah looked almost unrecognizable, thinner, her once glossy hair dull and lifeless, dressed in clothes that hung loosely on her frame. She was staring up at the building, at the windows of the apartment we had once shared. I hesitated, torn between walking away and acknowledging her. In the end, compassion won out. I crossed the street and approached the bench. "Sarah," I said quietly. She startled slightly as if pulled from a deep thought and looked up at me with eyes that seemed too large for her face. "John," she replied, her voice hoarse. "I was hoping I might see you." "What are you doing here?" I asked, not unkindly. "Remembering," she said simply, "trying to separate what was real from what wasn't." She gestured vaguely to her head. "The doctors say I need to confront the places where my delusions took hold. Part of the healing process." I nodded, unsure what to say. "Is it helping?" "A little," she admitted. "It's strange, looking at these windows and knowing someone else is living their life behind them now. Someone who doesn't know anything about what happened here." "I still live there," I said. "I never moved." She looked surprised. "Oh, I assumed you'd want a fresh start." "I did," I acknowledged, "but running away felt like letting what happened define me. I wanted to reclaim it instead." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. "I lost everything," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband, my home, my job, my dignity. All because I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't." She looked at me directly for the first time. "The worst part is I still don't know if I can. Even now with medication and therapy, there's a part of me that wonders if I was right all along. If you and she—" "We weren't," I said firmly. "Not then, not ever." She nodded slowly. "I believe you now, most days anyway." She gave a sad smile. "That's progress, I'm told." "I'm glad you're getting help," I said sincerely. "Too late, though," she replied, looking back up at the building. "Too late to save what mattered." As we sat there, an unexpected compassion washed over me. Not the rekindling of love or even forgiveness exactly, but a recognition of our shared humanity, of the fragility that exists in all of us. "It wasn't just about the box, was it?" I asked gently. "Something was happening to you before that." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I was disappearing," she said, her voice breaking. "Every day I looked in the mirror and saw myself fading a little more, getting older, becoming invisible. And then there was Emily, young, vibrant, full of possibility. The way you looked at her—" "I didn't look at her any particular way, Sarah. I know that now," she conceded. "But in my mind, in that moment, it confirmed everything I feared. That I was being replaced, discarded, that I wasn't enough anymore." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My therapist says it was projection, that I was the one who had stopped seeing myself as valuable, and I projected that onto you." I thought about that for a moment. Maybe we both stopped seeing each other clearly somewhere along the way. She nodded, seeming to take small comfort in the shared responsibility. "I should go," she said finally, standing up. "My brother's picking me up soon. I needed to see this place once more, to try to make peace with it." As she turned to leave, she paused. "I don't expect you to forgive me, John, but I hope someday you can find happiness again. You deserve that." "So do you, Sarah," I replied, and was surprised to find I meant it. "So do you." I watched her walk away, a diminished version of the vibrant, confident woman I had once loved. Her steps were tentative, as if she wasn't entirely sure of the ground beneath her feet. In that moment, I realized that while I had lost a marriage, Sarah had lost herself. And that was a far greater tragedy. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood in my apartment, feeling strangely empty. The victory, if it could be called that, was hollow. I had won the legal battle but lost so much in the process. Years of shared history, the comfort of partnership, the future we had planned together. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below, the same window where Sarah had first seen me helping Emily that fateful day. As if summoned by my thoughts, I saw a figure on the sidewalk. Sarah standing still amid the flow of pedestrians, looking up at our building. Even from this distance, I could see the devastation in her posture, the weight of loss in the slump of her shoulders. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and something unspoken passed between us. An acknowledgement of the pain we had caused each other, of the love that had somehow twisted into something unrecognizable. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, out of our apartment and out of my life, a shell of the woman she once was, broken by delusions and the loss of everything that defined her. I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the window, a gesture of farewell to the woman I had once promised forever to, and whispered the truth I had maintained throughout our ordeal. I just wanted honesty, not victory. But as I turned away from the window to face my empty apartment, the ghost of our marriage lingering in every corner, I knew that in the end, neither of us had truly won. We had both lost something precious, something that no court settlement could ever replace. The difference was, I still had a future to build. Sarah had been left with nothing but the ruins of her past and a mind she could no longer fully trust, a punishment far more severe than any I could have wished upon her. As for Emily, she and David moved out 3 months after the divorce, too uncomfortable with the lingering aftermath of being unwitting catalysts in our destruction. I sometimes wondered if, in another life, another timeline, we might have actually become friends, or maybe even something more. But that possibility, like so many others, had been consumed by the fire of Sarah's delusions, leaving nothing but ashes where a future might have grown. That night, I dismantled the room that had become my refuge during the war. It had served its purpose, but now it stood as a monument to conflict, to division. I would transform it back into a storage room or perhaps a home office, something new, something unburdened by the weight of our battle. As I took down the curtains and stripped the bed, I found myself thinking about the cost of principles, about the fine line between standing up for oneself and losing everything in the process. I had maintained my truth, refused to validate a lie, and in doing so, had watched my marriage crumble into dust. Was it worth it? I didn't know. Maybe I never would. But as I moved through the quiet apartment, slowly reclaiming it as my own space, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever came next, whatever new beginning awaited me, I would carry this lesson with me. That sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't losing someone you love, but watching that love transform into something you no longer recognize and being powerless to change its course.